I'm here at the BBC's historic studios in Maida Vale in West London with composer Kaija Saariaho and the chief conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, Sakari Oramo. Sakari, 250 years since Beethoven was born. Why is it important we celebrate this anniversary?
It's a good question. Is it suitable to celebrate great men of history exactly on the year when they were born or died or whatever? I guess it's just a tradition that has formed and become as it is, and of course it's always a good excuse to program these wonderful works of music when the celebratory year happens.
250 years is a long time. Why do you think it is that Beethoven still seems relevant to us and is still so important to us today?
Happened to be a genius. So I think his music remains very fresh, and I'm also for celebrating birthdays, but on the other hand we hear a lot of Beethoven's music, so I think it would be great to hear more of those works that we don't hear so frequently.
There does seem to be a timeless quality about Beethoven, doesn't there? You listen to a lot of Beethoven and it still feels almost contemporary, that freshness that you mentioned.
It's true. Well, he is, for example, personally, I don't like rondos. But the way he is composing rondos, they are every time so surprising and interesting. So it's his quality as an innovative composer that I think that cannot, it's not question of time or even century. We still recognize his imagination.
Do you see him, Sakari, as being a great musical innovator?
Absolutely, yes. And not only musical, but also I think he reinvented the position of the composer as a member of society. He got rid of his ties to the courts, and the sponsors were of course always there, but he was very keen on working sort of individually and independently from the donors, which was really one of the first such cases in history. And of course everything really goes hand in hand in his personality, and Beethoven's music has so many features that are so kind of rich and diverse. A dramatic side on the one hand, but also the humor I think is great sometimes, and it almost transcends everything else that's been done since.
A lot of us do listen to a relatively small selection of Beethoven's great catalogue of works. There are discoveries to be made, aren't there?
Oh, certainly, absolutely. And of course, I mean, this is what happens with most composers, no matter how revered they are. We only know a small fracture of their output, and certainly, yes, I mean, there is so much, and of course not everything is first class, but there are many things that one wishes one would hear more often, yes.
What do you think of, Kaija, when you think of Beethoven the man? What do you think his personality was?
Well, we know all kind of things about his bad temper and loneliness and all that, but what I think, what I admire, well, think about Fidelio, the only opera. The subject matter, the human, the political engagement that he had, I think all that is something which again is something important and valid today.
You've been asked to write a piece to introduce the European Broadcasting Union's concerts celebrating Beethoven across this year. What was your starting point?
My starting point was like, what? What could I possibly have common? How could I find a meeting point in our music? And then I started finding it. All his grandiose chords, and I also like chords, and our textures are very different, and he has this fantastic physical energy which is much less present in my music. So through meeting points, chords, and then through these big contrasts, little by little, I started having an idea for this tiny thing, and I called it Chimera, because Chimera is this animal who comes from different families but makes a new kind of strange animal.
It's going to be quite a thing, isn't it, that this piece of music you've written will be heard across Europe, across the year, before each of these Beethoven broadcasts?
I hope it's not getting into people's nerves too much.
I think definitely not. This year, Sakari, is going to be very exciting for listeners across Europe and further afield who'll be able to listen to concerts by radio orchestras shared around the world through the EBU. That idea of music breaking down borders, of music being freely exchanged, feels like something that Beethoven would have been enthusiastic about had the technology existed in his day.
Absolutely, and I think he would probably have been hopeless with technical gadgets, but on the other hand, he would have embraced the good things that they give us, and the exposure to art and music that is, of course, unlike anything else in these days. The trouble is almost how to find everything that is relevant amongst the huge flood of information that we get, even in the musical world. But I think there Beethoven would have certainly stood out as he did in his time, just on different fields.
And there is something about that in what's going to happen this year. I think the idea of concerts happening in Berlin, in London, in Barcelona, in Rome, that will then be broadcast across Europe. You will be able to identify these great Beethoven performances, and people will be able to listen to them wherever they are.
Absolutely, yes. And I hope also that, and I know that programmers around Europe and certainly the world as well have been kind of trying to be very clever in putting together programs that could maybe shed different lights on the works of Beethoven than they are usually shown in. And there's also a lot of music that is not by Beethoven but written about Beethoven. Just for fun, just looked at a list of works where Beethoven has been involved even though he hasn't composed them, and it's a huge amount of music up to our days, and Kaija's Chimera is now a new addition to that family.
A thought from you, Kaija, about sharing concerts across continents. We live in a world that gets ever more global, and yet nationalism is on the rise in many countries too. It's important, isn't it, for music to ignore physical borders?
It is, and music does ignore those borders, and it's true that this must be reminded, and the music should be brought to people who tend to close to their own little worlds.
Music is truly universal.
It is.